everyone. Welcome back to the Cleat Podcast. This is John LaFront, and we have a special episode for you today. It's going to be just me because I'm going to do some reading from our book, Christlike Boundaries, that just came out last week. But I want this to be more interactive than that. And I want to give some backstory as to why we wrote this book. We have met and counseled with and conversed with literally thousands of sincere Christians all over the globe. And these are people that don't struggle with boundaries because they want to be selfish. The reason why they struggle with boundaries is because they want to be faithful. They want to love well. They want to forgive. They want to honor family. They want to be peacemakers and to ultimately follow our Savior, Jesus Christ. But when they do that, it creates a very painful question for them. And that is just simply, can I set a boundary and still be Christ-like? And it's something that Christians they wrestle with constantly. And so we really wanted to address that. We didn't feel like there was a resource out there. And so we jumped in, and when we were looking at kind of the deeper confusion that existed there, for many people, boundaries don't feel like a practical issue at first. They feel like a spiritual crisis. And that might sound extreme, but it's absolutely true. Christians start wondering, am I being unforgiving? Am I dishonoring my parents? Am I creating contention? Am I being selfish for needing peace? And so that's why we wrote it. Not to make people colder or harsher or bitter or reactive, but to help sincere followers of Jesus Christ understand love and truth and forgiveness and honor and peace and family and discipleship, all in a healthier and more Christ-centered way. So this book walks through several ideas. How peace is not silence, how forgiveness is not reconciliation, honor does not mean, unlimited access. Talk about how Jesus withdrew, how Jesus let people walk away, how boundaries can protect what God has entrusted to us. And I wanted to start at the beginning. We're going to go through the introduction in just chapter 1 in this episode. And why I wanted to do that is because we started the book very intentionally with that. The first chapter is called Love is Not Compliance. And I think this has to come first because if we confuse love with compliance, then every boundary will automatically feel selfish. If love means keeping everyone comfortable, then saying no will always ultimately feel wrong. And if love means preventing disappointment, then honesty will always feel cruel. But Jesus Christ, he was perfectly loving and he was not compliant. He was full of grace and truth. And so today we're going to jump into the introduction and chapter 1 and offer a few reflections along the way. And as you listen, I'd love to just invite you to hold one question. Where have I mistaken compliance for love? So without further ado, let's jump in to the text. Introduction. Many people do not struggle with boundaries because they want to be selfish. They struggle with boundaries because they want to be faithful. They want to love well. They want to forgive. They want to honor their parents. They want to keep peace. They want to be patient, charitable, long-suffering, humble, and Christ-like. They're not usually asking, how can I get away with doing whatever I want? More often, they are asking a much more painful question. Can I tell the truth and still be loving? Can I say no and still be Christ-like? Can I forgive someone and still not trust them? Can I honor my parents and still limit their access? Can I protect my marriage, my children, my home, my body, my peace, or my calling without becoming hard-hearted? Can I step out of a harmful pattern and still belong to Jesus? Those are the questions this book is written for. And I do not come to those questions as a detached observer. My wife Ashley and I have lived inside the ache of them. We know what it is to love people deeply and still recognize that the relationship is not healthy. We know what it is to pray for reconciliation while also needing distance. We know what it is to be misunderstood, to carry grief that is hard to explain, and to wrestle with the spiritual weight of boundaries when family, faith, loyalty, forgiveness, and covenant all seem to collide. We have had to learn, often painfully, that telling the truth is not the same as being unloving, that protecting a marriage is not the same as dishonoring family, that forgiveness does not always restore access, that peace built on silence can cost too much, and that sometimes the most faithful thing that you can do is stop participating in a pattern that keeps asking you to betray what God has placed in your care. This book is not a tell-all. It is not written to expose people, settle scores, or make our private story the center of the message, but it is personal. These are not ideas we collected from a distance. They are truths we have had to wrestle with in real life, in our marriage, in our faith, in our home, and in our relationship with God. So if you're reading this with trembling hands, a tired heart, or a mind full of questions you are almost afraid to ask, please know this: we understand more than you may realize. For many sincere Christians, boundaries do not feel like a practical problem first. They feel like a spiritual crisis. The moment they begin to name what is unhealthy, something inside them trembles. They hear old teachings, old accusations, old family scripts, old fears. They wonder whether they are being unforgiving. They wonder whether they are dishonoring their parents. They wonder whether they are creating contention. They wonder whether their desire for peace is actually selfishness. They wonder whether the pain in their body, the anxiety in their home, the strain in their marriage, or the grief in their spirit is simply the cost of discipleship. And sometimes, because they do not want to disappoint God, they keep disappointing what God has entrusted to them. They keep saying yes when wisdom is asking for no. They keep staying silent when truth is asking to be spoken. They keep calling compliance love. They keep calling silence peace. They keep calling access honor. They keep calling premature closeness forgiveness. They keep trying to preserve relationships in ways that slowly erode their own soul, their marriage, their children, their health, or their ability to hear God clearly. This book is not written to make anyone colder. It is not written to make anyone harsher. It is not written to help people justify bitterness, contempt, or revenge. It is written because many people have inherited a version of Christian love that is softer than Jesus, weaker than truth, and far more governed by fear than by holiness. Jesus Christ was perfectly loving, but he was not compliant. He was merciful, but he was not manipulated. He was gentle, but he was not passive. He was forgiving, but he still discerned fruit. He was peaceful, but he did not preserve false peace. He honored what was sacred, and when necessary, he protected it. That's really important because many of us were taught a flattened version of Christlikeness. We were taught to think that the most spiritual person in the room is the one who can absorb the most discomfort, tolerate the most dysfunction, smooth over the most conflict, and stay endlessly available no matter what the relationship is producing. But that is not the pattern of Jesus Christ. The Jesus of Scripture tells the truth. He withdraws from crowds. He refuses to perform on demand. He allows people to misunderstand him. He lets some people walk away. He confronts hypocrisy. He protects the temple. He honors agency. He loves without surrendering his mission to the emotional demands of others. That does not make him less loving. It reveals what love actually is. Love is not fear with nicer language. Peace is not silence. Forgiveness is not reconciliation. Honor is not unlimited access. Discernment is not judgmentalism. Boundaries are not necessarily rebellion. Sometimes boundaries are the form love takes when truth can no longer be avoided. The purpose of this book is not to give you a formula for every relationship. I cannot tell you exactly what contact should look like with your parent, your sibling, your child, your in-laws, your spouse, your friend, your church leader, or anyone else. Real life is too sacred and too complex for that. But I do hope this book gives you language, clarity, courage, and a more Christ-centered way to discern what love may require when relationships become painful, confusing, or unsafe. The questions beneath these pages is not simply, how do I set a boundary? The deeper question is, what does it mean to love truthfully? And that question has changed my life. And my prayer is that it will help you come closer to Christ, not further from him, not because you have learned how to love less, but because you are finally learning how to love without lying. Okay, so just a few comments about that introduction. I hope it spoke to you. If so, you're in the right place. But legitimately, since we started this platform, the thousands of people that we've come in contact, they ask a lot of the same questions. They are struggling from a Christian's standpoint of a lot of guilt, a lot of shame, a lot of pressure, and what I would also consider just to be emotional and spiritual abuse. And we want to help unwire that. And when we're looking at Jesus Christ and we try to understand it more from that relationship lens and the type of boundaries he even put in place, it's right there in the text. But I just don't know that there's been a book that is as comprehensive as the one that we kind of jumped into. There's a lot of good books that have a Christian perspective on it. But this one we really wanted to do just a deep dive on several core principles. And like I said in the introduction, chapter 1 is love is not compliance. And that is kind of the foundation. Chapter 1 is written from more of Ashley's vantage point at the beginning of the chapter. This is where the aha happened for her, was in a conversation that she had with a good friend about the definition of love. And it was kind of that once the lid was open, the knowledge and the light came into her life in a really meaningful way. And I hope that you will resonate with that. But it comes from a heartfelt place. Again, this is not a tell-all by any means. We have a little bit of our personal experience, but mostly this book is to teach about Jesus Christ and how he uses boundaries. So with that being said, we'll jump into chapter 1. Chapter 1, love is not compliance. For much of my life, I thought love meant saying yes. I would not have said it that way at the time, but looking back, that belief sat quietly underneath so much of how I moved through relationships. Love in my mind meant keeping people comfortable. It meant making room. It meant smoothing over tension, accommodating expectations, and absorbing disappointment before it had a chance to turn into conflict. If someone was upset, I felt responsible. If someone was hurt, I felt pressure to fix it. If someone wanted access to my time, my emotional energy, my home, my marriage, or my peace, I assumed that saying no would somehow make me less loving, less patient, less generous, less Christ-like. I think many sincere Christians live with some version of that same equation, even if they have never named it. We do not usually say love means compliance, but we often live as though it does. We assume that loving people means staying available, staying agreeable, staying soft enough that no one has to feel the weight of our limits. We tell ourselves we are being kind, forgiving, humble, selfless. Sometimes we are, but sometimes what we call love is actually fear. Fear of conflict, fear of disappointing others, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being seen as selfish or hard-hearted. It took me a long time to see the difference. Part of what made it so confusing was that the distortion came wrapped in good things. Scripture teaches us to love. It teaches us to forgive. It teaches us to turn the other cheek, to honor father and mother, to be peacemakers, to show mercy, to bear one another's burdens. Those teachings are beautiful, and they are true. But many of us were handed those truths in ways that were flatter and narrower than Christ ever intended. We learned them as slogans rather than as part of a larger, living, spirit-led understanding of love, truth, stewardship, and discernment. Over time, what began as sincere discipleship sometimes hardened into something much smaller. The belief that being Christ-like meant being endlessly accommodating. That belief can do real damage. It can train good people to override their own discernment. It can make them feel guilty for needing space, for telling the truth, for naming hurt, for protecting what is sacred. It can teach them to confuse peace with appeasement and grace with self-erasure. And because the language around it is often religious, the confusion can run deep. People do not feel like they are simply struggling with boundaries. They feel like they are struggling with whatever they are being faithful to Christ, or whether they are being faithful to Christ. That is why this matters so much. The question beneath so many painful relationships is not merely what should I do? It is what does love actually require of me here? That is a much more searching question, and it eventually became one of the most important questions of my life. For a long time, I thought love meant making sure other people felt loved in the way they wanted to feel loved. On the surface, that sounds noble. It sounds generous. It even sounds Christian. But there came a point when that framework stopped working. I began running into situations where keeping one person comfortable seemed to come at me at the expense of truth, or of peace in my own home, or of the health of my marriage, or of what I knew deep down was wise. I found myself torn between competing demands, trying to satisfy everyone and ending up increasingly divided inside. At one point, while talking through one of those tensions, I said something that felt very true to me in the moment. I just want this person to feel loved. A trusted friend stopped me and said very gently, but very clearly, I think you are confused about what love means. That sentence has stayed with me. It was not condemning, it was clarifying. She was not telling me not to love. She was telling me that my definition of love had quietly become distorted. Then she said something even more direct. I think you think that love means compliance. And there it was, the hidden belief brought into the light. Once I heard it, I knew it was true. I had been equating love with accommodation. I had been assuming that the most loving response was the one that kept things calm, the one that made the situation easier, the one that avoided disappointing someone else. But that framework had left me vulnerable to confusion, guilt, and over-responsibility. It had also left me asking questions that were never going to lead me anywhere good. How do I make sure no one feels hurt? How do I keep everyone happy? How do I be loving in a way that does not cost anyone else anything? Those questions may sound generous, but they are impossible to live by in a broken world. They also are not the questions that Jesus asked. One of the most important things I have come to see is that Jesus was never ruled by pressure. He was perfectly loving, but he was not compliant. He was compassionate without being manipulated. He was merciful without surrendering truth. He was available, but not endlessly accessible. He did not heal every person in Israel. He did not answer every accusation. He did not explain himself to every critic. He did not chase every person who walked away from him. He loved fully, but he did not let the demands, distortions, or expectations of others govern his identity, his mission, or his stewardship. That matters more than we often realize. Many Christians have inherited a strangely sentimental picture of Jesus, one that emphasizes gentleness while overlooking clarity, mercy while overlooking truth, tenderness while overlooking strength. But when you read the Gospels closely, Christ is never flimsy. He is never reactive. He is never trying to keep everyone comfortable. He tells the truth, even when it unsettles people. He confronts what is false. He withdraws from crowds. He refuses to perform on demand. He allows people to misunderstand him. He allows people to walk away. And through all of it, he remains perfectly loving. That means love cannot simply mean making people happy. It cannot mean keeping access open at all cost. It cannot mean erasing consequences, colluding with denial, or calling something healthy when it is not. Love that abandons truth does not remain love for very long. It becomes enabling. It becomes fear dressed up as kindness. It becomes a way of preserving appearances while slowly betraying what God has actually entrusted to us. This is where many people get stuck, because not every yes is loving. Sometimes yes is generous, wise, and right. Sometimes it is exactly what love requires. But sometimes yes is driven by guilt. Sometimes it is driven by fear of conflict, fear of someone's anger, fear of losing approval, or fear of what it might mean if we stop making life easy for everyone around us. When fear is driving the yes, the fruit eventually tells the truth. We may look loving on the outside while becoming increasingly resentful, exhausted, anxious, and divided on the inside. A relationship can appear peaceful while quietly eroding what is sacred. A family can look close while functioning through pressure and overreach. A person can appear generous while living in chronic self-betrayal. That is why discernment matters so much. Jesus did not teach us to evaluate relationships merely by tone, language, or appearance. He taught us to look at fruit. What is this producing? Is it producing honesty, safety, freedom, trust, or peace? Or is it producing fear, confusion, guilt, resentment, and the gradual disappearance of what is most sacred in us? That question has changed the way I think about love. Love is not proven by how much dysfunction it can tolerate. Love is not measured by endless access. Love is not the refusal to disappoint anyone. In fact, some of the most loving choices a person will ever make are choices that disappoint others. A parent who says no to what is destructive is being loving. A spouse who protects the marriage from unhealthy intrusion is being loving. A person who refuses to participate in denial is being loving. Someone who tells the truth about what is happening, even when the truth creates discomfort, may be acting with more love than the person who keeps smoothing everything over. That kind of love often feels strange at first, especially if you've spent years believing that holiness looks like endless accommodation. It can feel harsh when it is actually clean. It can feel selfish when it is actually responsible. It can feel unkind when it is simply no longer dishonest. Part of the difficulty is that compliance often feels safer than truth. Compliance can preserve the illusion of peace for a while. It can postpone anger. It can delay grief. It can keep relationships looking intact on the outside, but the cost does not disappear. It simply gets paid somewhere else, in the body, in the marriage, in the home, in anxiety, in resentment, in private confusion before God. Truth, on the other hand, tends to bring things into the light. It reveals what a relationship has been depending on all along. If a relationship can only function when one person has no limits, no needs, no grief, no differing perspective, and no voice, then the relationship was never healthy. It was only stable under the terms of imbalance. That realization can be painful, but it is also profoundly clarifying. Once truth is in the room, you can begin to love according to the reality rather than according to pressure. And that, I believe, is much closer to the way Christ loves. Jesus never separated love from truth. We do. We tend to imagine that we must choose between being loving and being honest, between being gracious and being clear, between being compassionate and protecting what has been entrusted to us. But Christ held those things together perfectly. He did not use truth to wound, and he did not use love to avoid truth. He embodied both. That means love does not require pretending. It does not require us to call darkness light or to name something unhealthy when it is not. It does not require automatic restoration of trust where trust has been broken. It does not require immediate closeness simply because someone is asking for it. And it certainly does not require us to abandon stewardship over our own souls, our homes, our marriages, or our callings in order to prove that we are good. Real love can say no. It can name hurt. It can require change. It can acknowledge that forgiveness and access are not the same thing. It can be tender while still being firm. It can grieve what is broken without pretending that it is whole. It can release bitterness while also refusing to participate in patterns that destroy peace and integrity. This shift is not easy. In fact, it is often full of grief. When you stop complying, you often lose something. Sometimes you lose approval. Sometimes you lose the image of yourself as the one who keeps everything together. Sometimes you lose the illusion that a relationship was healthier than it really was. Sometimes you lose the role you have played for years, the easy one, the understanding one, the bridge, the peacemaker, the one who never asks for much. People may not like the change. They may call it selfishness or distance or pride, when what they are really reacting to is the fact that you are no longer helping them avoid reality. That grief is real, and it deserves to be named. But so does the freedom on the other side of it. There is something deeply healing about realizing that Christ does not ask us to disappear in order to become like him. He does not ask us to confuse fear with love or chronic self-abandonment with holiness. He does not ask us to keep everyone happy. He asks us to abide in truth. He asks us to love in a way that is anchored in him, rather than ruled by the emotional demands of others. So what is love if it is not compliance? Love is truthful. Love is courageous. Love is clean. Love is willing to disappoint when disappointment is the price of integrity. Love does not collude with what is destructive. Love protects what is sacred. Love tells the truth kindly, but it tells the truth. Love honors agency. Love does not force closeness where trust has been broken. Love can forgive and still hold a boundary. Love can be soft-hearted without becoming shapeless. In other words, love looks much more like Jesus than many of us were taught. Not the flattened, sentimental version of Jesus who exists mainly to validate endless niceness, but the real Jesus, full of grace and truth, tenderness and strength, mercy and clarity. The Jesus who loved perfectly and never once surrendered truth in order to keep people comfortable. That is the invitation before us, not to become colder, not to become harder, not to love less, but to love more truthfully. To stop calling compliance love when it is really fear. To stop measuring faithfulness by how well we keep everyone comfortable. To stop assuming that the most Christ-like person in the room is the one carrying all the discomfort so that no one else has to. The invitation to become truer, cleaner, more anchored, more capable of loving without lying. Maybe that begins with the simple question: where have I mistaken compliance for love? Where have I called something kind that was really driven by fear? Where have I been preserving comfort while betraying truth? And where might Christ be inviting me into a better, holier, more honest kind of love? Because love is not compliance. And learning that may be one of the first ways we begin to understand Christ-like boundaries. All right, my friends, that is the end of chapter 1, and I hope that you could hear the heart of that. The point is not to just love less. It is to love more truthfully. It is to stop calling fear love. It is to stop calling silence peace. It is to stop calling unlimited access honor, and to stop calling self-abandonment Christ-like. Because the real Jesus was full of grace and truth. Not grace without truth, and not truth without grace. It's both. And for many of us, that is where healing actually begins. So if this chapter gave language to something you have been carrying, the full book, Christlike Boundaries, walks through the larger journey of learning how to love, forgive, honor, protect, discern, and pursue peace without losing your tenderness or betraying what God has placed in your care. We talk about the difference between peace and silence, the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation, the difference between honor and unlimited access. And we look at the way Jesus withdrew, the way he let people walk away, the way he protected sacred spaces, and the way he loved without being governed by pressure, guilt, fear, or manipulation. So if you are wrestling with boundaries in your family, your marriage, your extended family relationships, your faith community, or your own heart, I really do believe this book can help. You can find Christlike Boundaries through the link in the show notes, and if you are watching this on social media, you can comment Christlike and we'll send you the link. But more than anything, I hope you take this question with you. Where have I mistaken compliance for love? And where might Christ be inviting me into something truer, cleaner, and more honest? Because love is not compliance. And learning that may be one of the first ways we begin to understand Christ-like boundaries. I hope you have a great day.